He brought a tumbler from the dresser, nearly filled it with water, and fetching an egg, prepared it in some private way, after which he broke it on the edge of the glass, so that the white went in and the yolk remained. As it was getting gloomy, he took the glass and its contents to the window, and told Gertrude to watch them closely. They leant over the table together, and the milkwoman could see the opaline hue of the egg fluid changing form as it sank in the water, but she was not near enough to define the shape that it assumed. "Did you catch the likeness of any face or figure as you look?" demanded the conjurer of the young woman. She murmured a reply in tones so low as to be inaudible to Rhoda, and continued to gaze intently into the glass. Rhoda turned and walked a few steps away. When Mrs. Lodge came out, and her face was met by the light, it appeared exceedingly pale as Rhoda's, against the sad dun shades of the upland's garniture. Trendle shut the door behind her, and at once they started homeward together. But Rhoda perceived that her companion had quite changed. "Did he charge much?" she asked tentatively. "Oh, no, nothing. He would not take a farthing," said Gertrude. "And what did you see?" inquired Rhoda. "Nothing I care to speak of." The constraint in her manner was remarkable. Her face was so rigid as to wear an olden aspect, faintly suggestive of the face in Rhoda's bedchamber. "Was it you who first proposed coming here?" Mrs. Lodge suddenly inquired after a long pause. "How very odd if you did." "No, but I am not sorry we have come, all things considered," she replied. For the first time a sense of triumph possessed her, and she did not altogether deplore that the young thing at her side should learn that their lives had been antagonized by other influences than their own. The subject was no more alluded to during the long and dreary walk home. But in some way or other a story was whispered about the many-dairied lowland that winter, that Mrs. Lodge's gradual loss of the use of her left arm was owing to her being overlooked by Rhoda Brooke. The latter kept her own counsel about the incubus, but her face grew sadder and thinner, and in the spring she and her boy disappeared from the neighbourhood of Holmstoke. Chapter 6. A Second Attempt. Half a dozen years passed away, and Mr. and Mrs. Lodge's married experience sank into prosiness, and worse. The farmer was usually gloomy and silent, and the woman whom he had wooed for her grace and beauty was contorted and disfigured in the left limb. Moreover, she had brought him no child, which rendered it likely that he would be the last of a family who would occupy that valley for some 200 years. He thought of Rhoda Brooke and her son, and feared that this might be a judgment from heaven upon him. The once blithe-hearted and enlightened Gertrude was changing into an irritable, superstitious woman, whose whole time was given to experimenting upon her ailment with every quack remedy she came across. She was honestly attached to her husband, and was ever secretly hoping against hope to win back his heart again by regaining some least of her personal beauty. Hence it arose that her closet was lined with bottles, packets, and ointment pots of every description, nay, bunches of mystic herbs, charms, and books of necromancy, which in her schoolgirl time she would have ridiculed as folly. "Damned if you won't poison yourself with these apothecary messes and witch mixtures some time or other," said her husband, when his eye chanced to fall upon the multitudinous array. She did not reply, but turned her sad, soft gaze upon him in such heart-swollen reproach that he looked sorry for his words, and added, "I only meant it for your good, you know, Gertrude." "I'll clear out the whole lot and destroy them," she said huskily, "and try such remedies no more." "You want somebody to cheer you," he observed. "I once thought of adopting a boy, but he's too old now, and he's gone away I don't know where." She guessed to whom he alluded, for Rhoda Brooke's story had in the course of years become known to her, though not a word had ever passed between her husband and herself on the subject. Neither had she ever spoken to him of her visit to Conjuror Trendle, and of what was revealed to her, or she thought was revealed to her, by that solitary Heath-man. She was now 25, but she seemed older. 6 years of marriage, and only a few months of love, she sometimes whispered to herself. And then she thought of the apparent cause, and said, with a tragic glance at her withering limb, "If only I could again be as I was when he first saw me." She obediently destroyed her nostrums and charms, but there remained a hankering wish to try something else, some other sort of cure altogether. She had never visited Trendle since she had been conducted to the house of the solitary by Rhoda against her will, but now it suddenly occurred to Gertrude that she would, in a last desperate effort at deliverance from this seeming curse, again seek out the man, if he yet lived. He was entitled to a certain credence, for the indistinct form he had raised in the glass had undoubtedly resembled the only woman in the world who, as she now knew, though not then, could have a reason for bearing her ill will. The visit should be paid. This time she went alone, though she nearly got lost on the heath and roamed a considerable distance out of her way. Trendle's house was reached at last, however. He was not indoors, and instead of waiting at the cottage she went to where his bent figure was pointed out to her at work, a long way off. Trendle remembered her, and laying down the handful of furze roots which he was gathering and throwing into a heap, he offered to accompany her in her homeward direction, as the distance was considerable and the days were short. So they walked together, his head bowed nearly to the earth, and his form of a colour with it. "You can send away warts and other excrescences, I know," she said. "Why can't you send away this?" And the arm was uncovered. "You think too much of my powers," said Trendle. "I am old and weak now, too. No, it is too much for me to attempt in my own person. What have you tried?" She named to him some of the 100 medicaments and counterspells which she had adopted from time to time. He shook his head. "Some were good enough," he said approvingly, "but not many of them for such as this. This is of the nature of a blight, not of the nature of a wound, and if you could ever do throw it off, it will be all at once." "If only I could." "There's only one chance of doing it known to me. It has never failed in kindred afflictions, that I can declare. But it is hard to carry out, and especially for a woman." "Tell me," said she. "You must touch with the limb the neck of a man who's been hanged." She started a little at the image he had raised. "Before he's cold, just after he's cut down," continued the conjurer impassively. "How can that do good?" "It will turn the blood and change the constitution. But, as I say, to do it is hard. You must get into the jail, and wait for him when he's brought off the gallows. Lots have done it, and perhaps not such pretty women as you. I used to send dozens for skin complaints, but that was in former times. The last I sent was in 13, near 20 years ago." He had no more to tell her, and when he had put her into a straight track homeward, he turned and left her, refusing all money as at first. Chapter 7. A Ride. The communication sank deep into Gertrude's mind. Her nature was rather a timid one, and probably of all remedies that the White Wizard could have suggested, there was not one which had filled her with so much aversion as this, not to speak of the immense obstacles in the way of its adoption. Casterbridge, the county town, was 12 or 15 miles off, and in those days, when men were executed for horse-stealing, arson, and burglary, an assize seldom passed without a hanging, it was not likely that she could get access to the body of the criminal unaided, and the fear of her husband's anger made her reluctant to breathe a word of Trendle's suggestion to him or to anybody about him. She did nothing for months, and patiently bore her disfigurement as before. But her woman's nature, craving for renewed love, through the medium of renewed beauty, she was but 25, was ever stimulating her to try what, at any rate, could hardly do her any harm. "What came by a spell will go by a spell surely," she would say. Whenever her imagination pictured the act, she shrank in terror from the possibility of it. Then the words of the conjurer, "It will turn your blood," were seen to be capable of a scientific no less than a ghastly interpretation. The mastering desire returned, and urged on her again. There was at this time but one county paper, and that her husband only occasionally borrowed. But old-fashioned days had old-fashioned means, and news was extensively conveyed by word of mouth from market to market, or from fair to fair, so that, whenever such an event such as an execution was about to take place, few within a radius of 20 miles were ignorant of the coming sight. And, so far as Holmstoke was concerned, some enthusiast had been known to walk all the way to Casterbridge and back in one day, solely to witness the spectacle. The next assizes were in March, and when Gertrude Lodge heard that they had been held, she inquired stealthily at the inn as to the result, as soon as she could find the opportunity. She was, however, too late. The time at which the sentences were to be carried out had arrived, and to make the journey and obtain admission at such short notice required at least her husband's assistance. She dared not tell him, for she had found by delicate experiment that these smouldering village beliefs made him furious if mentioned, partly because he half entertained them himself. It was therefore necessary to wait for another opportunity. Her determination received a fillip from learning that 2 epileptic children had attended from this very village of Holmstoke many years before with beneficial results, though the experiment had been strongly condemned by the neighbouring clergy. April, May, June passed, and as it is no overstatement to say that by the end of the last-named month Gertrude well-nigh longed for the death of a fellow creature. Instead of her formal prayers each night, her unconscious prayer was, "O Lord, hang some guilty or innocent person soon." This time she made earlier inquiries, and was altogether more systematic in her proceedings. Moreover, the season was summer, between the haymaking and the harvest, and in the leisure thus afforded him her husband had been holiday-taking away from home. The assizes were in July, and she went to the inn as before. There was to be one execution, only one, for arson. Her greatest problem was not how to get to Casterbridge, but by what means she should adopt for obtaining admission to the jail. Though access for such purposes had formerly never been denied, the custom had fallen into desuetude, and in contemplating her possible difficulties, she was again almost driven to fall back upon her husband. But, on sounding him about the assizes, he was so uncommunicative, so more than usually cold, that she did not proceed, and decided that whatever she did, she would do alone. Fortune, obdurate hitherto, showed her unexpected favour. On the Thursday before the Saturday fixed for the execution, Lodge remarked to her that he was going away from home for another day or 2 on business at a fair, and that he was sorry he could not take her with him. She exhibited on this occasion so much readiness to stay at home that he looked at her in surprise. Time had been when she would have shown deep disappointment at the loss of such a jaunt. However, he lapsed into his usual taciturnity, and on the day named left Holmstoke. It was now her turn. She had first thought of driving, but on reflection held that driving would not do, since it would necessitate her keeping to the turnpike road, and so increase by tenfold the risk of her ghastly errand being found out. She decided to ride, and avoid the beaten track, notwithstanding that in her husband's stables there was no animal just at present by which any stretch of imagination could be considered a lady's mount, in spite of his promise before marriage to always keep a mare for her. He had, however, many cart horses, fine ones of their kind, and among the rest was a serviceable creature, an equine Amazon, with a back as broad as a sofa, on which Gertrude had occasionally taken an airing when unwell. This horse she chose. On Friday afternoon one of the men brought it round. She was dressed, and before going down looked at her shrivelled arm. "Ah," she said to it, "if it had not been for you, this terrible ordeal would have been saved me." When strapping up the bundle in which she carried a few articles of clothing, she took occasion to say to the servant, "I take this in case I should not get back tonight from the person I am going to visit. Don't be alarmed if I am not in by 10, and close up the house as usual. I shall be at home to-morrow for certain." She meant then to privately tell her husband. The deed accomplished was not like the deed projected. He would almost certainly forgive her. And then the pretty palpitating Gertrude Lodge went from her husband's homestead, but though her goal was Casterbridge, she did not take the direct route directly through Stickleford. Her cunning course was first in precisely the opposite direction. As soon as she was out of sight, however, she turned to the left, by a road which led to Egton, and on entering the heath wheeled round and set out on the true course, due westerly. A more private way down the county could not be imagined. And as to direction, she had merely to keep her horse's head to a point a little to the right of the sun. She knew that she would light upon a furze cutter or cottager of some sort from time to time, from whom she might correct her bearing. Though the date was comparatively recent, Egdon was much less fragmentary in character than now. The attempts, successful and otherwise, at cultivation on the lower slopes, which intrude and break up to the original heath into small detached heaths, had not been carried far. Enclosure acts had not taken effect, and the banks and fences which now exclude the cattle of those villagers